everyone. In this video, I'm talking about these 5 cameras right here. All 5 of these cameras are under $100 each. They're all interchangeable lens cameras, and they all take fantastic looking photos still. So without further ado, I'm gonna go through each one of these cameras, talk about that specific camera, and show you some photos we've taken with it. And at the end of this video, I'll tell you what my favorite one is and which one I'd recommend. However, I'm gonna mainly give it to you to see the specs of all these, see the photos I've taken with them, and make a good judgment on your own of which one you think is the best option for a camera under $100. So let's just get right into it. Go down, hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and let's get on to camera number 1. And so the first camera is this one right here, the Nikon D3100. So this is a DSLR from Nikon, of course interchangeable lens with Nikon's F mount. This was released in 2010, so it's about 12 years old right now, and it shoots 14.2 megapixel raw photos, and of course JPEG photos as well. And then this has an APS-C sized crop sensor with a 1.5 times crop factor, so pretty much a standard crop sensor camera. On the back we have a 3-inch fixed LCD screen. It's not a touch screen and it doesn't articulate or flip out in any way. And it's also not super good quality. It's pretty much just used for scrolling through the menus and kind of looking at your framing for your photos, but it's not super usable for checking exposure and focus and stuff like that, because like I said, it's not really a good quality screen. Now this camera shoots up to 3 photos per second in continuous shooting mode, so not a super high burst rate, definitely not the best for action sports or something like that, but it does shoot video. It shoots 1080p video at up to 24 frames per second, so no slow motion 60 frames a second 1080p or anything like that, just standard 1080p 24 frames per second. However, when it records video, it's 100% on auto mode, so you can't really control your exposure manually, like your aperture, shutter speed, or anything like that. It pretty much dials all that in for you, like recording with a phone. So the video in this is not super usable, however you can get away with it. I've actually made a few videos about this camera already, which I will link all those videos down in the description if you want to check them out, but I really wouldn't recommend buying this just for video recording. This camera does have a built-in flash on top. Personally, I wouldn't really recommend using built-in flashes like this, however, it's definitely just a good feature to have if you do need it. And last but not least, this camera weighs 505 grams. So you can kind of see how it looks in the hand. It's a pretty small DSLR. I have fairly small hands, and my pinky hangs off the bottom there, of course. It doesn't really have a super deep grip either. Overall, it feels decent in the hand, but it's definitely on the smaller side, which obviously could be a good thing because it's lighter than a lot of bigger DSLRs are. However, it doesn't really have the best grip in the world. And besides that, like I said, it has the screen in the back, a few buttons on the back here, your mode dial up top, and really not a whole lot of other buttons or dials or accessories or anything like that. Pretty standard. Battery slot on the bottom, and then the SD card slot is actually on the side here, which is really nice. You don't have to take your tripod plate off like you have to do with some cameras to even get to the SD card, but it is just standard UHS 1 SD card slot. Of course, all these are pretty much gonna have really standard basic specs because these cameras are all released like at 2012 or even older than that. So none of these are gonna have any specs that will blow you away. I just wanna say that right off the bat. But then if you go to the left side here, this has a GPS port, which I'm not exactly sure what that's used for, probably a proprietary accessory, a USB port, HDMI out, which is pretty nice, and then AV out as well. And that's pretty much it for the D3100. Pretty basic. However, I've taken some awesome photos with this, and it's pretty nice to use. It's just super simple and basic, and it's really missing out on a lot of nice features that newer cameras have, like fast autofocus and a fast burst rate. And like I said, these are all pretty basic, so none of the specs are really gonna blow you away. I guess one more thing I forgot to mention is it does have a hot shoe on top. Not all of these have hot shoes. I definitely love having hot shoes in my cameras for just attaching anything to them, whether it be a flash or a microphone or anything like that. But either way, that is pretty much the rundown on the Nikon D3100. Next up, camera number 2, we have the Nikon D80, another Nikon camera. So this camera, you can already see it's pretty beefy in the hand. It's a lot beefier than the D3100, and it's actually because Nikon's D80 or D70, I don't know what we call their D series with just a double-digit number. I don't know how to really separate them, but this series is a more professional series than the D3000 series or D5000 series, the D with 3 digits after it. So this is a more professional camera. However, this was released earlier than the D3100, so it's an older camera. It was actually released in 2006. So this is technically in a higher end line than the D3100 is. However, it's older than the D3100, so it's gonna have some specs being worse, some specs maybe being better than the D3100. Of course, the build quality and feel in the hand is much better than the D3100, but let's just get into the specs of this real quick. So the D80 shoots 10 megapixel raw photos, so less megapixels than the D3100. This has an APS-C sized CCD sensor, which is different than a CMOS sensor. I'll let you look into that on your own, but a lot of people really like CCD sensors and say they render colors better and look more natural than CMOS sensors. And this also has a 1.5 times crop factor, so the same crop sensor as the D3100. And then it also has Nikon's F mount, which is again the same lens mount as the D3100, so it takes takes pretty much any Nikon lens. This camera, however, has a 2.5-inch LCD screen on the back, so it is a ½ inch smaller than the D3100 and even worse quality. Again, you can use it for checking your framing after taking your photos, but it's not really good for checking your exposure on your photos or focus or anything like that. You're probably just going to need to wait until you get them onto your computer to really look into all that stuff. This camera also shoots up to 3 photos per second in its burst rate mode. However, the D80 does not record any type of video, not even 480p, not even 144p. It does not record a video at all. So if you do need video, this literally is not an option for you. However, it does have a built-in flash like the D3100 and of course a hot shoe on the top as well. And this camera comes in at 668 grams. So not substantially, but definitely heavier than the D3100. And I've already said this a few times, but the build quality of this is much nicer. Obviously it's heavier, it has a deeper grip, it's taller, so more of your fingers fit on this without, you know, dangling on the bottom there. And most of everything else about this is very similar to the D3100. Pretty much the buttons are in similar placements. This does have a little screen on top to show some of your settings. Most stuff on the back is about the same. Battery slot on the bottom, SD card slot on the side. Pretty similar to the D3100, and the experience with shooting with this and the photo quality that comes out of this is also, in my opinion, with my eyes, pretty similar to the D3100 as well. And because of that, I've actually enjoyed using the D80 more than the D3100, just because it feels so much nicer in the hand. It's better build quality, and the image quality really isn't super different coming out of them. Obviously, the D3100 has high resolution, 40% more resolution actually with your images, but personally from just using both of these cameras, I do enjoy the D80 a little bit more. All right, next up we have this one right here, the Sony NEX C3. So as you can see, this is one of the smallest cameras I have here. This is obviously tiny compared to the Nikon D80, which again, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, depending on you and your situation. But let's just get into the specs of the Sony NEX C3. So this is a mirrorless camera from Sony that was released in 2011. This camera actually shoots 16.2 megapixel raw photos. So it has the highest resolution sensor so far. I believe it's actually the highest out of all of these. This has an APS-C CMOS sensor with a 1.5 times crop factor, so pretty much the same as the other two Nikons. However, this has Sony's E-mount, so this is a mirrorless camera rather than a DSLR like these two were. Now again, if you don't know the difference between a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, I definitely recommend looking into that on your own time. It's definitely pretty big differences, especially with the mount, because this mount you can actually pretty much adapt any DSLR lenses to it, so you don't always have to stick with the exact brand like you typically have to do with a Nikon mount. With this, you can adapt Nikon lenses, Canon lenses, any sort of vintage lenses really easily because of the short flange distance on this mount. So that is a big pro of this, is the adaptability for being a mirrorless camera. And this has a 3-inch partially articulating screen, so this is the first non-fixed screen. As you can see, it kind of flips up here so you can get a down low angle and be able to see directly at the screen. Then it also kind of flips down like this, you know, if you have your camera up above you. So it's pretty decent. It's definitely much nicer than having a fixed screen if you want to get those down low angles or up high angle shots. This can actually shoot up to 6 photos per second in continuous shooting mode, and it does shoot video. However, it's only 720p video at 30 frames per second. It can't do anything greater than that. So I really would not recommend using this for video either. Again, it has it if you need it, but I would not recommend using this specifically for video. And the last but not least, this camera weighs 225 grams, so it's almost a third of the weight of the Nikon D80. Then when it comes to the ergonomics and the body of this, obviously it is tiny. It fits right in my hand like this, and it really doesn't have much support. You're actually gonna have almost 2 fingers hanging off here depending on how you hold it. The grip is barely anything, it's just a little nub here. In terms of buttons and stuff, it really barely has any. It has a shutter button, a playback button, power switch, record video button, and then literally just a few buttons here and a dial in the back. And the same thing with the ports, it pretty much just has HDMI and USB port. And on the bottom you have, of course, the battery slot, and the SD card slot is actually not even in the battery slot. It's even closer to the tripod screw. It's right here on the bottom in the middle. And so if you have this on a tripod or any sort of tripod, quick release plate, or anything on the bottom of this camera, you will not be able to get to the SD card slot at all, and you probably won't be able to get to the battery slot either, depending on how big your plate is. So that is super annoying with this camera. And also, this does not have any sort of hot shoe. However, it does have this Sony proprietary adapter here. You can actually get a hot shoe attachment for it, as well as a flash and some other accessories, but they're like proprietary directly from Sony. They're kind of hard to find now, so it's a little bit weird, but you can technically adapt a hot shoe to this camera if you need to. And that is pretty much it for the Sony NEX C3. All right, next up we have this camera right here. This is the largest out of this whole lot of cameras. This is the Canon Rebel XT. So this is actually the oldest out of all these cameras as well. It came out in 2005. And real quick, I do have a battery grip on this, so the actual camera is about this big, but I recommend using a battery grip. I really love it, and it pretty much just came with it when I got it. So I just want to let you know right now, this does have a battery grip attached to it, which makes it a little bit bigger and heavier. So like I said, this was released in 2005. It shoots 8 megapixel raw photos. It has an APS-C CMOS sensor with a 1.6 times crop factor, so a slightly higher crop factor than the rest of the cameras we've talked about. This is a Canon camera, so it of course has Canon's EF mount, which is a pretty popular lens mount, and there is pretty much unlimited amount of lenses you can get for the EF mount. This camera has the absolute smallest screen out of all of these at 1.8 inches. You can barely even use this for checking framing on your photos that you've taken, and definitely not for checking exposure, focus, anything like that. So a tiny LCD screen, basically only usable for scrolling through the menus. It's absolutely tiny. This camera shoots up to 3 photos per second in continuous shooting mode. This camera also does not record any type of video at all. However, it does have a hot shoe on top and a built-in flash. And then last but not least, this camera weighs 540 grams without the battery grip, and with the battery grip, I'm not sure the exact weight of it, but it's substantially heavier. I'd say it's about the same as the D80 with the battery grip, which is kind of crazy, which really shows how much the D80 weighs. And then when it comes to ergonomics, everything else about this camera, also pretty basic. I mean, you of course have your mode dial up top, power switch, basic buttons on the back here, if you're going through the menu, stuff like that. Menu button there and playback buttons, stuff like that. And those types of buttons back there. Also a pretty basic interface. Then you have your memory card slot on the side. However, this actually doesn't take SD cards. This takes compact flash cards. I think you can actually get compact flash to SD card adapters. However, just keep that in mind, it's not a standard SD card. I actually also have a video about this camera, which I'll link in the description. If I have videos about any of these cameras, I'll link those down in the description. So definitely check that out after you're done watching this video. You can kind of look further into all these cameras. But yeah, like I said, I have a battery grip on this, and with the battery grip, this camera is awesome. It feels so good in the hand. I would say with the battery grip attached, this is the best feeling camera in the hand just for usability. As a really full-size grip right there, all my fingers fit on there really well. It's a pretty deep grip as well. And of course, if you get vertical shots, you can just turn over here. It's got another full deep grip right there for getting vertical shots. Then when it comes to outputs and stuff on the left here, you have a video out port. However, it's kind of like a proprietary, it's like a 3.5mm jack type of video out. So you need probably a special cable for that. It's not just an HDMI. Then you have a remote port for remote shooting, and then a digital port, which looks like a mini USB port. So that might be for updating firmware or something like that. But that's all the ports this has on it. And of course, on the bottom, you have your battery slot, or with the battery grip, it's actually right on the side here to change your batteries out. But yeah, that's pretty much it with this. There we go. But yeah, that's pretty much it with this camera. Another pretty basic camera, but this one I'd say definitely feels the best in the hand if you do have the battery grip. Without the battery grip on this, I'd still put the D80 as the best feeling in the hand out of these. But either way, let's move on to camera number 5, the final camera. So this is it right here, of course. And this is the Panasonic GF3. This camera was released by Panasonic in 2011. This camera shoots 12 megapixel raw photos. This has a micro 4/3 CMOS sensor. So this has a 2 times crop factor, which is the highest crop factor out of all of these. Of course, the smallest sensor with a micro 4/3 sensor in here. However, it does have a micro 4/3 lens mount, which is similar to the E mount. So it's a mirrorless camera, which makes it obviously a lot smaller, and means you can adapt a bunch of different types of lenses to this camera. This camera has a 3-inch fixed touchscreen on the back, so you can actually use this touchscreen to adjust some settings, go through the menu, stuff like that, which is nice. However, it's not super responsive, and it's a little weird to use a touchscreen to get through stuff. However, it's still there if you need it, but it is just a fixed screen, so you can't rotate it, adjust it, anything like that. This camera shoots up to 3 photos per second in continuous shooting mode, and it does shoot 1080p video up to 30 frames per second. So overall, this actually does shoot the highest resolution and frame rate combination out of all of these cameras. However, again, I really can't recommend buying any of these cameras specifically for video. I think if you do want to get into video, something closer to a $200 budget would be the bare minimum to get decent looking video. All right, real quick, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. But I'm also recording this segment with all 3 of the cameras that do record video out of these 5. So definitely watch this entire segment if you want to see what type of video quality you can get out of these 3 cameras. So if you didn't know, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone that wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. So some of the benefits of Skillshare are, of course, that it's an ad-free platform. So you can watch all the classes you want without being interrupted by annoying advertisements and breaking your focus. There's also new premium classes added weekly, so there's pretty much always going to be something new to discover on a weekly basis. And then the entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. So I actually signed up for Skillshare over a year ago when Marquez Brownlee first released his Skillshare course called YouTube Success, Script, Shoot, and Edit with MKBHD. So if you don't know, Marquez is essentially the biggest tech creator on the YouTube platform, and he's someone that I really look up to, and I've been watching him for years. So I decided to join Skillshare because of his course. But then after I finished Marquez's awesome course, I pretty much got sucked into the platform and binge watched a bunch of different courses about filmmaking, creativity, and productivity. And the classes on Skillshare have seriously helped me create better YouTube content for you. So the first 1,000 people to use my link down in the description will get to try Skillshare for 1 month free so that you can decide if this is something that will help you build new skills like it did for me without having to pay anything out of pocket for the first month. So thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and hopefully you got an idea of what type of video footage you can get out of these 3 cameras. And let's get back to the video. I'm definitely gonna make another one of these videos where I pull together a bunch of cameras for a $200 price point, maybe even a $300 price point. So get on subscribe and stay tuned if you wanna see those videos. But either way, this camera also has a built-in flash and it weighs 264 grams. When it comes to the body, build quality, everything of this, also very, very simple, just like this Sony NEX camera actually. There's pretty much a dial and a few buttons on the back here, a few buttons on top, and that is pretty much it for buttons on this. On the right side, you have an HDMI output, and it actually looks like there's a mini and a micro HDMI, which is pretty neat, pretty unique to have 2 different HDMI outputs. And then on the left side, there's literally nothing. So those are the only outputs on this camera. On the bottom, you of course have your battery slot and SD card slot. It's both in the same slot. So no side SD cards, sadly. And besides that, this is of course tiny. There's barely any grip to this, just a little nub there. All your fingers pretty much hang off the bottom. Overall, it's an absolutely tiny camera, just like the Sony, so it's not the best to hold and use. However, it can fit in your hand, it can fit in your pocket without a lens. So depending on your situation, this might be a good thing, but it's really not the best camera to hold and actually use. And so there we go, that is an overview of all 5 of these cameras that are all interchangeable lens cameras under $100 each. Hopefully this video helped you figure out which one is best for you if you're in that sort of a budget. But real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and just rank all 5 of these cameras from my least favorite all the way to my favorite out of these. Of course, this is just my opinion. All of these cameras have pretty similar specs, however, they're all a little bit different, and each one might fit your needs a little better, depending on, of course, who you are and what you need. So I'm just gonna rank these real quick based off my opinion and what I like to use them for. So let's get right into it. My least favorite out of all 5 of these cameras overall is this right here, the Panasonic GF3. I would say this is my least favorite to use in general. It doesn't feel super good in the hand. It has a micro four thirds sensor, so it's, you know, a smaller sensor size, which has some of its setbacks with that. Either way, this is my least favorite to use out of all 5 of these. Next up, my second least favorite out of these cameras is this right here, the Canon Rebel XT. This camera feels super good in the hand and everything. However, it's the oldest out of the bunch, so it has the worst image quality. Like I said, still you can take great photos with this. Definitely don't think it takes terrible photos, but overall, in general, out of all of these, this one just has the least performance out of the photos coming out of it. And it has that tiny screen that you can barely see. Overall, I'd say this is my second least favorite out of the bunch. Next up, these are the top 3, D80, D3100, and Sony NEX C3. And I'd say for third place, I'm gonna go with the Sony NEX C3. I'd probably say this takes the best quality photos. If that's just what you need, just the best image quality, 16 megapixels, it takes great looking photos. However, it's just not that good to use. It doesn't have a hot shoe. It's really hard to hold. Overall, it's just not the best camera in my opinion to use. So I'm gonna put this one at number 3. All right, there we go. The last 2 remaining are both Nikons. For second place, I'm gonna go with the D3100. Like I said, both these cameras are super, super similar. I think the D80 just feels better in the hands in my opinion. So because of that, I'm gonna say my favorite out of these, like I said, all of these are very similar in terms of everything. They're all just slightly different and have different things that are better and worse about them. So definitely don't take this as the D80 being the one that you should buy, because there's definitely better options depending on what you need. But this is my favorite out of all these cameras. I've had a blast using this camera. It takes good looking photos. It feels so good in the hand. And overall, I would say this is my favorite out of these cameras. So that wraps this video up. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go down and hit the like button and subscribe to this channel, as well as check out the other videos I've made about all these cameras. I'll link all the videos I made about them down in the description if you want to see those. Stay tuned for another video just like this, except with the $200 budget, $300 budget, maybe other budgets. I already have a best cinema camera under 1,000 and then under 500. So I'm pretty much just gonna work my way through the list of different budgets for cameras. But that wraps this video up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.